Quick test. Show me the zest. Let's go. Okay, you're under arrest. Let's lift up this a little bit. Alright, fools, that's it. Fallout New Vegas is a game that uses geological survey data to base its map on, and beyond that, there are towns that are based on real-life towns, and there are roads that are based on real-life roads. You have the famous Interstate 15, you have Highway 95, and you even have smaller roads like Nipton Road that pulls from the real region. I believe this is one of the reasons New Vegas's world has stuck with so many players and attracts people to this game. Today, I want to go through each of the towns in the outer Vegas region and rank them based on livability. Now put yourself in the position of someone who is just moving into this world. You're you right now in real life, and suddenly you're plopped into New Vegas. You're gonna find the best town for survivability and to give yourself a decent quality of life. The year is 2281, which is when the game takes place, but let's just say there is no Courier coming to save the day. The world is just going to unfold as it would without them.
Aww.
And we'll rank these towns based on 10 different categories. We'll consider housing. We'll consider if the town has a doctor. We'll consider what the trading is like for the town. Does it have a clean source of water? Does it have food? Is there safety and defense? Do we have leadership? Do we have a community? Do we have potential work? And beyond that, the final category is, do we have potential for growth? The towns we'll be taking a look at are, in order, Goodsprings, Sloan, Prim, Nipton, Novak, the 188 Trading Post, Boulder City, Grub and Gulp Rest Stop, and finally, Jacobstown. And just in case you were wondering, the more urban sections of Vegas, such as Freeside or North Vegas, have very different considerations, so I'm not going to be covering them today. Let's start with the town of Goodsprings. Now, as I rank these, I'm probably going to be shifting them around a bit, so don't take the initial ranking as if it's set in stone. So Goodsprings housing. We actually have a lot of boarded up homes, and I'm taking these boarded homes into consideration as potential open homes for someone new moving in. Now, will your house fall on you in the middle of your sleep? Potentially, but is it an option to move into? I think so, realistically. I counted 5 boarded homes, and 2 of those homes have trailers alongside of them for extra storage, extra housing, whatever you would like to use it for. There is also the schoolhouse. You'll have to clear out the mantises within and get rid of the eggs and all that. You have the gas station. Ringo is in there for now, but as events proceed, that might become an option. And then you also have Victor's shack, another one that's sort of on the fence. Victor doesn't spend his entire time in Goodsprings though, so that might be an available choice down the road. We have pretty good options for housing. Now, does the town have a doctor? Of course, that's the first thing you see when you start New Vegas, Doc Mitchell, and then you also have Chet for medical supplies, something worth considering. On the downside though, Chet is a cheapskate, so I think if you were dying on his front porch, he would just let you die if you didn't have the caps to pay for it, and Doc Mitchell is getting pretty old, and once he dies, I don't know who could take his place. For trading, as we mentioned, we have Chet at the general store, and then you also have Trudy at the saloon for perishable items, food, drink, that sort of thing. On the downside though, there is going to be a severe lack of passing traders and caravans because the I-15 is closed during the events of the game. You have the powder gangers running rampant all across that road. Prim is a mess, we'll get to that later, and then of course the death claws as you get closer to Vegas. On the plus side though, Goodsprings does have a clean water source. It's not only one of the few towns in game with a clean water source, it's one of the few places in game that offers a clean water source for free. You can walk down to the Goodsprings source and start sucking water out of the trough like nobody's business. On the downside though, you might get eaten alive by geckos who pose a threat when trying to access that water, and pairing with that, that water source isn't directly within town. As you can see in the beginning of the game in the tutorial, you have to go pretty well outside of town to get to that source. To counter that though, when I was surveying the town, I did notice that within a couple locations like Doc Mitchell's house and the Goodsprings Saloon, you can get fresh water from the sinks or maybe the toilets if you're really desperate, but most of the townsfolk within their homes don't have access or direct access to fresh water. They would either have to go mooch off of one of those 2 locations or go down to the Goodsprings source, as we see the one woman doing during the tutorial mission with sunny smiles. You can't just live off of water though, so when it comes to food, we do have a lot of bighorner ranchers and farming going on in town, and then you also have imports, I'm assuming, from the general store. So you are going to have access to food, but I will assume that most of the townsfolk would appreciate it if you got your own thing going and at least helped contribute to town. When it comes to safety and defense, we do have some detracting factors here. There are no walls for the town. There is no standing militia. Now, of course, the townsfolk are willing to defend themselves. They strap up armor, take out their guns, they're armed, and they're ready to fight the powder gangers when they attack, but they don't have an acting, standing militia like Westside does, for example. There is a major powder ganger threat, and that is clear and present. The area is wide open from attacks at all angles, and then beyond that, you do have coyotes, geckos, and rad scorpions in the wilderness nearby. Benefiting the town, though, is Chet, who has a stock if he's willing to share or if townsfolk are willing to purchase off of him to better prepare themselves. And then we also have Easy Pete's dynamite stash, which levels the playing field a bit with the powder gangers. However, as we progress into the next category of leadership, I would say Trudy and perhaps Sunny Smiles are the best we have in that regard, but there's no true standing leadership either. There's no real form of government. If there was to be some sort of enacted change, it would have to be a group effort. Everyone would have to come together and realize, okay, we need to defend ourselves better. They don't have a leader to look to lead them towards that direction. As cool as Trudy is, I don't think it's the best thing for a town to have a bartender as their leader. On the other hand, the community is self-sufficient. They're willing to take in and help a stranger, so I think your opportunity of getting a place in town is a lot better, considering how we see things play out with the Courier, who Doc Mitchell gives medical assistance to. Sunny Smiles helps out immediately as soon as they ask, and then you can also see Trudy and other townsfolk relatively accepting. The potential for work here in Goodsprings isn't all that great. I think your best bet would be starting your own ranch or farm and becoming or contributing to the self-sufficiency of the town. I don't think there's a lot of overhead in town. They're not looking to pay people for goods and services. Nobody's going to be paying you to go hunt geckos. Maybe they could see to set aside a bit of money to make sure that the Goodsprings source stays clear and safe to visit. That could be an opportunity for you. And then beyond that, maybe some saloon work helping Trudy, although I don't think she's looking to get a bar back. She seems to be doing fine on her own down there. And finally, moving on to the final category of potential growth, which takes into consideration most of the categories that we've talked about previously to help project the future of the town. There are many homes for the taking, so not just you as a newcomer, but potentially other travelers could come in and add to the town's population. We have clean water and food. The area does have elbow room, so even if the population increased, all the current people who live there might not notice it that much or be irritated by it. It's near a major interstate in the I-15, which could lead to passing travelers, and if it eventually gets cleared up, then you'll have a lot more caravans passing through. You have access to a doctor, and there are welcoming people such as Dr. Mitchell, Sunny Smiles, and Trudy. For now, we're gonna put Goodsprings in B tier, and here's why. I know there are a lot of benefits. Clean water is a major one, but this town could be wiped out like nothing. There is not a whole lot of protection here. The powder gangers could roll through and absolutely crush this place without the Courier's intervention. And I'm not just talking about Joe Cobb's small gang. The larger gang from the NCRCF is eventually going to look to push out a bit. They're going to run out of food. They don't seem to be self-sufficient over there. So what will raiders do when they can't make for their own? They will take from others, and Goodsprings is their closest option or one of their closest options. So this town is going to sit at B tier for now. It might adjust lower or higher as we proceed. Okay, so now that we've moved through one town, as we proceed, hopefully we can go a little bit quicker through the next. So here we are in Sloan. Sloan's housing is terrible. There is one bunkhouse with 10 beds, 5 bunks across those 10 beds, or 10 beds across those 5 bunks rather, and one small trailer with no mattress. So maybe you can go find a mattress and live out in the trailer. I'm sure that would be a lot better, at least in some ways, than sleeping in a stinky bunkhouse. There is no doctor. The trading is very minimal. I guess you can go trade with Jas Wilkins, who runs the food hall, but again, the I-15 is closed, and in this town, you are directly trapped between the powder gangers and Deathclaws. Nobody is coming up here. I looked all over the place for clean water. I assumed the food hall might have a working sink, but no, there's no clean water, so it must be imported. I'm not sure how these people are even alive when we enter the game. Farming, none. There's no farming. There's no ranching going on. Jas Wilkins is the cook, but again, this food must be imported. This is an NCR work location, so perhaps the NCR sends in food to them regularly, although I'm not sure if they're continuing to do that during the situation with the I-15. This town is not safe or well defended at all. It's known that the powder gangers came in and stole their dynamite quite easily. However, they didn't kill them, which which is kind of confusing as to how that worked out. They have nothing but armed workers and Snuffles the mole rat, which technically acts as a guard dog within the game. They also have watchmen on the road, and you can see these barricades set up. The town does not have walls, they just have a crappy little fence that lines the way, and that's not defending anybody from anything. They have no acting militia. The powder ganger threat is right next to them, the Deathclaw threat is right next to them, and their dynamite was stolen, so there's not a whole lot going for them in terms of safety and defense. But we do have Chomps Lewis as the leader. The issue with this is his daughter is a Great Khan. Great Khans are a direct adversary to the NCR, which this town is an NCR mining town. There's conflict of interest going on here between the leader and an enemy group that could pose a threat to the town eventually. There's not a great sense of community in this town, given it's a bunch of quarry workers who I believe are from California, and that takes us to potential work. Even the workers here cannot work because the quarry is shut down and infested with Deathclaws, and that wasn't even the thing that shut it down initially. It was the powder gangers stealing the dynamite that they were able to use in the quarry. So no one is even making a steady income to pay you consistently for long-term work. You could clear out the Deathclaws, more of a death sentence or a one-time gig. If the Deathclaws are cleared, perhaps quarry work would become available. So that changes everything, but that's a huge wall in front of you. Beyond that, you could fix the generator, which Chomp Lewis didn't even know was an issue as far as I'm concerned, and then healing Snuffles, which might give you a little bit and help morale in town, but these are not long-term work solutions. If anything, that just adds another grave concern, given if that generator goes out, the town doesn't have any power. So let's consider the potential growth here. It's minimal currently, almost nothing. In fact, I think it would go in the other direction. I think people are going to be looking to get out of here as time progresses, and it could just become a ghost town, or rather 4 shacks in the middle of the wasteland. Quarry Junction acts as a major resource of limestone to the NCR, though, to help them create concrete. There's a nearby rail line, and I had no idea of this, but this rail line is used to move supply from Sloan and Quarry Junction to Boulder City, where there is an active mixing plant. This is a vital location to the NCR, so if the powder gangers and the Deathclaws are dealt with, this could become a very, very important town and could grow very quickly as well. This is very fitting with the theme of Vegas because you're taking a huge risk, a huge gamble. I think the likelihood that you go here and just end up dead is through the roof. However, if this place does work out, if things pan out well for town, this could be one of the best and most profitable locations to be in the entire Mojave down the road. Given that potential, that will keep it just out of F tier and we'll put it into E tier. Moving down the other direction of the I-15, we'll find our way to Prim. The housing in Prim is quite open. There's a lot of potential here. You have large casinos that are being unused in the Vicky and Vance and the Bison Steve. There is a neighborhood within town, although I think many of the townsfolk that are trapped in the Vicky and Vance live there. We also have an abandoned gas station. There's also Beagle's shack, and I think he has about enough backbone to let you just kick him out of his own home, and the sheriff's shack, who is recently deceased, but you might get kicked out of there depending on who gets put in that position. Maybe it's you. There is no known doctor in town. Trading is quite minimal, with just Johnson Nash being available for that, but he has to get back to the Mojave outpost so he can get to his stock. The I-15 is currently closed again, and this is another town on that route, so there's not going to be any passing traders or caravans. And then you have the convicts, which are in town, which even if there were traders or caravans coming through, they can't get in because the town has been overtaken. There's no clean water source. It's irradiated. The water tower there is irradiated, and the other sources are irradiated because of it. For food, the Bison Steve does have a kitchen, and there's potential for farming and ranching, but currently none of that is going on. For safety and defense, this is kind of an interesting situation because there are giant concrete walls and metal fencing all around town. There's minimal entrances, and we have an overpass that limits entry and covered in mines, so they can sort of funnel dangers with this moat situation going on because of that overpass. And you also have roller coaster tracks around the Bison Steve so that you could position up defense and armed militia all around the place to scout and look out for potential dangers. With all of this in mind, though, the town was completely invaded by convicts coming out of the NCRCF. They have no standing militia. The powder gangers and convict threats are nearby. There are jackals nearby in the Nevada Highway Patrol Station, and then you also have ghouls, geckos, and coyotes in the wilderness near town. When it comes to leadership, the assumption is Johnson Nash is kind of filling that role currently. Beagle is tied up, and he's nothing close to a leader, and the sheriff was murdered, so there's no law. The town's clearly in rough shape and needs some legitimate leadership to get them in order and help the people take their town back. The community is just a group of survivors in the Vicky and Vance casino. Many were killed when the convicts took over, and you also have have people like Samuel and Michelle Kerr that left after the convicts took over. They formed the 188 trading post. Now when it comes to potential work, the town has to be cleared of convicts, so I suppose that's one job, but again, sort of a death sentence. I don't think anybody, unless you're John Wick, is just going to go out and clear this whole town. Now when it comes to potential work, the town of course needs to be cleared of convicts, but if that does happen, you would have the Mojave Express for courier work. You could start a farm or a ranch. There's casino businesses in town to take a bit of that Vegas business for travelers coming to and from. You also have the hospitality industry, so you can get in one of those casinos and maybe work as a bartender, clean rooms, something like that. And obviously there's a gap in a sheriff and potential deputies that sheriff might need. And I think after a traumatic event like the town being taken over by these convicts, they would be quite willing to fund a large militia group or set of deputies under that sheriff. So that's a legitimate possibility for you as well, but you will be put in danger. So it's up to you if you would even want to take that sort of work. In terms of potential growth, there is tons here. There is a lot of potential if the I-15 is cleared. This is a town with a whole lot of infrastructure. It's much larger than a place like Good Springs or Sloan. Again, the town has to be cleared of convicts. So when we're giving this its ranking, I'm going to have to put this place in F because it's already full of convicts. There's just about nothing to do here but skulk around town and sneak. You couldn't actually make a life for yourself, and you'd probably just end up getting shot. The next town we have is in quite an interesting state. Nipton on Nipton Road has plenty of houses open to you. There are many homes. There's an entire trailer park. There's even a motel, but I think most of the buildings outside of that motel are destroyed. And then you also have the town hall, which could be repurposed into a large living quarters. Given the state of the town the Legion left it in, we can move through a lot of these categories quite quickly. Is there a doctor? No. Is there trading? No. Is there a clean source of water? No, the water here is irradiated, unfortunately. Is there food? Nope, unless you feel like eating people. How's the safety and defense? Well, there are car walls and a chain link fence, but they seem to do absolutely nothing as the town was easily invaded and destroyed by the Legion. You have Legion mongrels in the town hall currently. There's a jackal gang at the Nipton Road pit stop, just not too far from Nipton, of course, and then you also have rad scorpions in the wilds nearby. The town has a bad history of leadership. Currently, there is none. Before that, though, the mayor was corrupt and then burned on a pile of tires for that corruption. The community has boxcars with broken legs, and he wants to die. So that's it. What do we have for potential work? Well, completely rebuilding the town. All roles are open. You could be a doctor if you could figure out how to be a doctor in the wasteland. Hopefully you already are a doctor going into this situation. You could be a trader at the general store. You could operate the motel, and you can even become a farmer and a rancher. So really everything needs to be built from the ground up. There's a ton of potential work, but in terms of actual work, just about none. And the potential growth, sort of a similar situation. We have tons of open houses. We have Nipton Road, which connects the I-15 and Highway 95, so you could get a lot of traders and passing caravans. It's near the Mojave outpost. It's a large town, again, with a lot of elbow room, and everything is currently needed as there is nothing but the husk of an empty town for the taking. That's quite the positive take on a very desolate situation. It's not along one of the major roadways necessarily in the I-15 or Highway 95. It was already destroyed once, and quite brutally at that. People are crucified on the streets, and fires are still burning within the town. The Legion mongrels infest the town hall, and this requires an entire rebuilding, as I've stated. So this town currently has to go in F next to Prim. There's not a whole lot there, although hopefully the Legion would leave you alone if you built it up again. Probably not, though. Now that we've gone through 4 towns, I think I'm actually going to be doing a bit of shifting. I think I'm going to move Sloan up into D tier because at the very least it's not in nearly as bad of a state as Prim or Nipton currently. And then I think I'm going to move Prim up to E tier because the NCR is nearby and they do have purpose and reason to clear out those convicts. So you might just be able to wait it out in the Vicky and Vance if you can make it there without getting killed. Nipton can't be on the same tier as Prim because it is completely destroyed and it's a target for the Legion as well. If you try and rebuild there, the Jackal gang nearby might just come take all your stuff and kill you. And then if you actually do get things in a good state, the Legion has all the reason in the world to come back and make an example out of you because they don't want their work to be undone. They would certainly try and come back and destroy the town. So we're gonna keep Nipton at F tier, move Prim up to E, and move Sloan up to D. Quite a ways away from Nipton, we eventually make our way to one of the cooler towns in game, Novak. Now Novak seems to have 2 homes that are shared by various settlers, so you might be able to find a bed or a spot on the floor in there if they let you. There's 1 boarded up home at the edge of town. You have the motel with 4 boarded rooms and 1 open currently, of course. Then you have one boarded up bungalow next to Cliff Briscoe and the Rangers bungalows. And you also have the boarded gas station. There's an outside garage area, but that's being used for scrapping and prospecting. We do have a doctor in Ada Strauss who is also guarded by 2 mercs. That's a huge plus. In terms of trading, we have Cliff Briscoe. Ada Strauss will trade with you as well. You have Old Lady Gibson just down the road, and there are tons of travelers being funneled this way down Highway 95 because the I-15 is closed. The town doesn't have a great source of clean water outside of imports from trading. There is a water tower in town, but again, all the water in town is irradiated. When it comes to food, the McBrides have a ranch where they have Brahmin. Currently, they're being killed by a nightkin though, so a bit of an issue, and there's no farming in town. So beyond the McBrides, we only have imports from trading. And then there's also a food tent, which is one of the locations that Ada Strauss hangs out next to. When it comes to safety and defense, we do have 2 ex-1st Recon snipers sitting at the top of the Dinky Dinosaur to help defend the town. The Dinky Dino is a vantage point for them, and there is a car wall and chain link fence surrounding the motel area, so if there is some sort of emergency, the town could sort of funnel into this area and maybe defend themselves a bit better from the motel and various points within that section of town. On the downside, Jeannie Mae Crawford might sell you into slavery in the middle of the night. We do have the Viper gang camped out at a highway encampment not too far from town. You're a bit open to a Legion attack as we're not too far from the front lines of the war, and there are ferals and nightkin from Repcon causing issues, and along with some mole rats near town, but that's not a huge issue. There are some further benefits when it comes to the defense of town though, because you are sort of surrounded by some NCR locations. You have a Ranger outpost not too far from town. You have the NCR at Helios 1 not too far from town, and then you have Camp Forlorn Hope and other Ranger posts between you and the Legion. So there is some benefit here and some negatives, but I think largely this is a pretty well defended town and it seems quite safe. Like many of the other towns in the Mojave, there's not clear leadership here. I guess you could say Jeannie Mae, kind of, but she's a monster and she must be stopped. And another negative to that is Boone might pop her noggin off if he finds out that she's the one who sold his wife to the Legion. In terms of community, this is a town of prospectors, traders, and scrappers. Potential work includes scrapping and prospecting from the Repcon test site, but the problem with that is Repcon is infested with ghouls and nightkin, so you're a bit capped there. I guess you could start a farm because that seems to be needed within town, or another ranch even for that matter. You could also maybe find some work at Helios 1. They don't seem to have a high standard when it comes to hiring people, but there's a high influx of traders coming into this town, so that might reduce their overall needs, and it might make it harder for you to find a role. Now, what's the potential growth situation like for Novak? I think it's quite good. It's along a major trade route, especially as long as the I-15 stays closed. You have prospecting at Repcon if that gets cleared out. You have open housing, there's a use for farmers, and you're near a major solar power plant. Now, considering the potential negatives, of course, Repcon needs to get cleared out for this town to reach its full potential, although it doesn't seem to be entirely necessary. It's not going to crush the whole town and ruin its chances. The other major factor is that given you have 2 ex-recon snipers and someone who is as hell-bent on killing Legionnaires as Boone is, if the Legion wins, and that's a big if, the Legion wins the second battle at Hoover Dam, and then Boone starts killing a bunch of Legionnaires as they push into the area, they might make an example out of Novak and destroy it just for allowing Boone and Manny Vargas to be housed in this town being ex-NCR. Part of me thought maybe the Legion will allow this to just be a town within their territory, which they do have, but again, given they have 2 former NCR members there and Boone potentially killing Legionnaires, they might just wipe the whole town out. All things considered though, I think there are a couple of factors that make this town a bit above Goodsprings, so it's gonna get put into A tier. That's certainly up for debate though, and we'll see if it can hold that position as we proceed with the last 4 locations. Next up we have the 188 trading post, not too far down the road from Novak. Now, in terms of housing here, all I was able to find was a trailer with some mattresses. There's not a lot of legitimate housing, but what many of the people who live here have done is create their own sort of shacks out of old world relics and useful items that they can find and put together. Doctor, there is no doctor here. You have Ezekiel, who is a follower of the apocalypse, and he might be be able to help you out a little bit, but he's not a doctor. He specializes in pre-war history and tribal culture. When it comes to trading, this might be one of the better locations given its name. You have Samuel and Michelle Kerr, who again moved from Prim after the convicts took over. You can trade with them. You have an arms merchant who is former NCR and sells weapons. You do have Alexander with the gun runners, but he probably won't sell to you, unfortunately. And you also have a high influx of traders passing through here because the I-15 is closed. When it comes to water and food, you're going to be relying on imports from trading. They don't seem to have a lot set up there, but you might have an opening there in terms of a rule within town if you're able to set up your own little shack, and maybe you can start some ranching or farming. The thing about that, and I should have made this point earlier with setting up your own ranch or farm, is I'm assuming most of you don't know how to farm or ranch. Neither do I, so of course you're going to have a lot of time on your hands to figure that out, but you also might die before you ever figure that out. Hopefully the location you're in has enough safety and defense to protect you for the meantime. So the NCR is stationed at the 188 trading post, so there's a bit of a defensive position here, and the troops move between Boulder City and the Hoover Dam, as well as Camp McCarran, so you do have some troop movements that might protect the region a little bit better than other areas of the Mojave, but there are no walls or fencing. You have fire-breathing ants in the El Dorado Dry Lake nearby, and you are also near the front line of the war with the Legion. What do we have in terms of leadership? Not much once again. I guess you could say Samuel and Michelle Kerr, given they are the founders, but they don't control the gun runners down below the bridge or the arms dealer. It's really just sort of a collective post where people hang out and sell things. The community includes passing traders, there's a strange child, and Veronica of the Brotherhood of Steel, kind of. She's hanging out there. In terms of potential work, there's not much of a town here, so there's not a lot to be done. Again, these are people who are already running their own businesses, so they're probably not looking to add overhead to their situation. You could hop on with a caravan though as a guard or help at the bar, but I doubt they're looking for help. They have 2 people to run 2 shifts. When it comes to potential growth, it's a bit of an interesting situation. It is a major trade stop for caravans, and we've already seen 3 separate businesses set up in the location, but there's no infrastructure to support newcomers necessarily. Many of the other towns are built out of old world towns, and people just move in and use what was there. For the 188 though, you're going to have to set up your own situation, your own buildings and things like that. With all that being said though, I am going to put the 188 at C tier, I think, given that it's quite safe to be here. Caravans pass through and people are hanging out with no walls there. There's not a whole lot of danger in the region. The thing is, you're going to have to get to work right away. You're going to have to set up your own thing, provide your own service, and do something. Otherwise, you're not much better than just being out in the middle of the wasteland. Down the road, not too far from the 188, we have Boulder City, which is in really rough shape. You have partly destroyed buildings that aren't sealed entirely, and you have a couple of boarded up buildings as well, but again, mostly destroyed. Little remains after the destruction from the first battle of Hoover Dam. For doctors, we don't have anyone here. Trading, you have Ike at the Bighorn Saloon, who happens to be the only person left in town who actually stays there. You have the potential for some traders passing down the 95 to Vegas, and the 188 trading post is close by, so you could make trips to and from there. Clean water, there is none, but you are near the Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, which is a source of pure water, which we'll get to later with another location. However, we don't have anything in Boulder City to get that water, so no real water source here. Hopefully you can import some. It is an NCR location, so maybe they help get water to that spot. What do we have at food? Outside of the saloon, you have some white horse nettle that naturally grows around the town and slightly decreases hunger and increases health, but it is toxic and used for various poisons in the game, and it decreases endurance and agility, so I don't know if you want to be roaming around eating too much of that. In terms of safety and defense, the town is destroyed, and there is an intersection that is barricaded by rubble and junk fencing, and it has an NCR presence, so there is some level of defense here, but obviously it was blown to bits in the first battle of the Hoover Dam, and there's a good chance that it could take even more damage in the second one. When it comes to leadership, I guess you could say the NCR, but their presence is quite questionable, and the community is nearly deserted. Again, Ike claims that he's the only one actually left in town. When it comes to potential work though, we did talk about this earlier, there is an NCR cement mixing plant. However, no limestone enters from the train station due to Quarry Junction being overrun with deathclaws, so there could be potential work in the future if the quarry is cleared out, but that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. So for potential growth, there's the chance to begin anew if Quarry Junction reopens, and this is another vital spot to the NCR's infrastructure. In construction in the Mojave, there is potential, but again, just like Sloan, a lot of things have to happen for that to become relevant. I think with that being said, we're gonna put Boulder City in E tier, above Nipton, but below Sloan in D tier, so it'll be right next to Prim. I think that's fair, although it has a very different situation than Prim. There's not a lot going on. There's one bartender and one saloon in town. Everything else is destroyed, and of course, that center section of town is currently in the middle of a standoff between the NCR and Great Khan, although that doesn't seem like a situation that would last that long. You know, how patient is the NCR going to be? It might last a couple of days before they just decide to kill all the Great Khans within there. We'll have to go back past the 188 and continue a little bit further towards Vegas, and eventually we'll find the Grub and Gulp rest stop. So the housing situation here is obviously quite minimal, but there is one boarded up shack that doesn't seem to be in use currently. We also have some makeshift beds near a campfire, and you have one unused trading tent next to Fitz and Lupe, who are the current traders in this location. So I guess there's room for one more trader. We'll get to that later though. In terms of doctor, we don't have one, but this location isn't far from a followers outpost in the area near a train yard. When we consider trading, we have two traders at the location at all times, being Fitz, who deals in food, and Lupe, who deals in water. And then you obviously have occasional passing traders. However, it's said that caravans and NCR troops are not commonly stopping by here because the 188 is so close. So there's a bit of a conflict in that regard. You do have individual traders who stop by here, though it's not devoid of that, of course. Then you also have clean water here because Lupe sells purified water from Lake Mead as a licensed water merchant. Of course, you're gonna have to pay for that, though. There's no free source. You must buy it from her. Fitz ranches Brahmin and sells food. Again, you have to purchase this, so hopefully you're making some money. And then in terms of safety and defense, it is near urban Vegas, which doesn't necessarily mean it's all that safe, but it's a bit out of the way. It's near the NCR's Camp Golf, which eventually will be full of rangers, so that should kind of help protect you a bit. There are no walls or armed guards though, or any sort of acting militia. We don't have much of a leader because there's not much of a town. Fitz and Lupe seem to run things here, and again, that's the community, Fitz and Lupe, and then passing traders. For potential work, you are near the RepCon HQ for potential scavenging and prospecting. Now, I think this is where there's a lot of potential, at least for one person to move into the Grub and Gulp if you can get permission or acceptance from Fitz and Lupe. You can go to that RepCon HQ, scavenge what you can from the safer levels, and then move into that third tent and sell scrap. That helps you fill out the trading posts a little bit better because, of course, right now all they're dealing in is food and water. And perhaps in the meantime, while you're living on what you can scrap, you can work with Fitz and Lupe to start a farm by using Fitz's Brahmin dung to help for fertilizer, and then maybe use some of Lupe's fresh water to help grow your crops. And you can really turn this into a bit of a settlement. So I think there's some potential here, and that takes us into potential growth. You can move into that shack, which could be used. There's the extra trading tent, and you're also near that followers outpost with many train cars that could be used for housing or shops. I think there could be a bit of a future in joining those two locations and making a larger town. Maybe I'm just being very imaginative though. I think the potential of working with the followers is quite realistic. They're an open group, and if you're coming to them with good ideas of producing clean fresh water and food and adding more housing for settlers across the Mojave, they would be interested in helping you out with that. So I think I'm gonna make some adjustments to our tier list. I think I'm gonna move Good Springs up to A tier with Novak. I'm gonna keep the 188 trading post at a C tier, and I'm gonna move the Grub and Gulp to B tier. Of course, it's not currently in a great state, but the area is generally safe. Again, we're near that followers outpost, and we're near the RepCon headquarters for scrapping and scavenging, similar to how the RepCon test site is used. So there's a lot of potential in this little trifecta of locations that I think could eventually lead to something more significant. Along with all those open train cars, tell me you can't envision some sort of interesting Fallout town where people live in train cars and have various homes and shops in that section. And just to bolster this point a bit more about why I think there's a lot of potential growth here, the Grub and Gulp sits right on the roadway that leads you into Vegas, and it's currently the only viable roadway to get to the strip coming from this direction. Again, the I-15 is closed from the Powder Gangers and Deathclaws, but if you follow it on the map, it leads you pretty close to Fiend territory. It's incredibly dangerous and not worthwhile. But the 95 that the Grub and Gulp sits right on leads you right into where the Gunrunners are, where the Crimson Caravan has its HQ in the Vegas region, and then Freeside's East Gate. So you must have a lot of people coming from New California and other areas to get to Vegas from this route. You're going to have a lot of people passing by. And of course, by process of elimination, I'm sure you can guess what the S tier location is if you remember all the towns I listed earlier in the video. Jacobstown is S tier. I think it's better than Novak and better than Good Springs if you're looking to stay alive and have a decent quality of life. When we approach the housing situation, you have 6 bungalows, 3 of them are boarded. It doesn't seem that any of the super mutants or nightkin that are currently in town live here. You have 18-ish rooms within the lodge as well that are open. Marcus has his own room, and again, maybe some of the super mutants and nightkin live in those rooms, maybe not. They don't seem to sleep very much. There is one boarded section of the lodge that is cut off. Maybe you could clear that rubble with the help of some of the mutants and make the lodge even bigger and more open. And then you have a pool hall / rec room that could be altered or reused to house even more people. When it comes to the doctor in town, we do have Doc Henry and Calamity. Although they're likely more interested in research than healing, I'm sure they would be willing to provide that service for town. They seem quite compassionate, even though Doc Henry is pretty limited in his patience. Think about what he's doing there in town. He's trying to help the Nightkin with their schizophrenia issue, and he's directly trying to help Lily. So he's trying to help people. He's there to help and serve the community. Along with that, when it comes to trading, it is said that they get passing caravans, even though they're all the way up there in the mountains, and they trade their bighorner meat. We have Calamity, who deals in medical supplies as well, and there's a bit of a collectivist approach going on. They share what they produce, so you might not need to do too much trading to get what you need. On the downside, there isn't a general store or anything like that, so getting specific wants, or if you have a certain preference towards food items or something like that, you probably won't be able to get it. When it comes to a clean water source, pure water comes from the sinks in the lodge, so there's just pure water here, straight up. Food, you have the bighorner ranching as stated. You also have wild bighorners in the foothills, and it's said that they can go out there, get some of those bighorners, and restock their herd when numbers fall. When it comes to safety and defense, this might be the best town in game. In fact, I'm arguing that it absolutely is. There's the giant tree wall surrounding the entire town. Inside, of course, it is full of super mutants ready to defend the location, and it's isolated up in a mountainous region. Now, the negatives come along with the Nightkin being unhinged, especially towards humans. You have Night Stalkers up in the wilderness as well, and then prodding mercs from the NCR, so there are some dangers here. When it comes to leadership, this actually might be the only town with clear leadership. Marcus is the leader. He founded the town. He leads the super mutants and the humans. On the downside, though, you do have Keen, who separately leads the Nightkin, poses a bit of an issue. When it comes to the community, it's said that Marcus is seeking to create an environment where ghouls, super mutants, Nightkin, and humans can all live in harmony. Currently, of course, you have one ghoul and one human. The rest are super mutants and Nightkin. When we're looking at potential work, you can help ranching the bighorners. You can aid Doc Henry and Calamity with their research by doing field work, and you can also go round up the bighorners from nearby wilderness to add to their herd. But field work with Doc Henry and Calamity will likely be dangerous, and the super mutants are much more physically capable than humans, so that limits your overall usefulness within town. However, if the human population continues to grow, you could see the usefulness for farming, which doesn't currently exist, and that's really helped out by the fact that there's a pure water source. So what's the potential growth for Jacobstown? I think it's pretty good. They have tons of open housing in the bungalows and the lodge. It's very well defended by walls and mutants. You have many bighorners for a food source. You have fresh water, and it's already isolated and self-sufficient. On the downside, though, lodge rooms might be owned by super mutants already, so I would ask before you move in. There's not that many humans. It's out of the way of main roads and travelers, so it might take a while to build up a population. And the worst of all, the NCR would like this settlement gone. They're sending mercs to prod and goad the super mutants into an attack that could then get them to spin some propaganda and justify an assault. Furthermore, on the good side, Doc Henry is seeking to help cure or treat the Nightkin and their ailments from prolonged stealth boy use, so if you get that figured out, it's even better of a situation. And Marcus wants to create, as I've stated, a human mutant goal haven of coexistence. He's looking to create something good and sustainable and also self-sufficient. And one of the best realities of this settlement is it seems quite distinct and quite safe from any outcome that occurs to Vegas. All the other towns are really hoping that the NCR does well, because what the Legion does to them can be quite unpredictable. However, this town being so far out of the way and in the mountains, it might be largely irrelevant to whatever faction takes over the region, because they'll have a lot to do down close in and around Vegas. They probably won't be wanting to expend resources attacking some mutants that live off in the snowy mountains. This is why the NCR is sending mercs up to Jacobstown, because they don't want to expend their own resources doing so. And the thing with mercs, at least it seems in game, is that they're not going to be hell-bent on removing them. They're not getting direct orders from the military, and they can decide to stand down and just turn down the contract or tell the NCR, look, this isn't worth what you're paying us. Okay, so looking at our tier list in its final state, state, I think we have a pretty sensible setup. Jacobstown has a lot going for it, and the only real dangers there are the Nightkin, and I think the biggest threat the Nightkin pose is just leaving town and taking the manpower with them. I think Keen is more likely to do that than begin slaughtering the town and start a war with the super mutants, which they're a bit outnumbered and would likely lose anyway. Then down in A tier we have Novak and Goodsprings. They have a series of benefits to them and a couple of detracting factors that keep it out of that S tier level that Jacobstown holds. The Grub and Gulp rest stop has a ton of potential, at least from my eyes, but it doesn't have a ton going on at the moment. It's quite safe in that area though. The trading post, the 188 trading post that is in a pretty decent state. I think it should sit in the middle. There's not a lot of potential. There's no infrastructure in or around that whole area, but it's also not very dangerous. Sloan is in a terrible situation, and I could definitely see Sloan sliding down to E tier, but the one thing that keeps it at D is the fact that the NCR has a lot of reason to get that place back in good order, but the Powder Gangers and the Deathclaws pose too much of a threat, and the whole town is locked down for the moment. E tier has Prim and Boulder City. I think this is sensible. Prim is currently invaded, so going there, you're just immediately putting your life at risk, and Boulder City has almost nothing going for it. There's one guy living in town. And finally, we have Nipton in F tier. This place was destroyed once, and there's a good chance it will be destroyed again if someone tries to set up shop here. And you have the Jackal Gang not far away, so if they get a sense that the town is starting to get some more settlers in it and people are gathering resources and things, the Jackals might come in and just take it. And then even if you can fend off the Jackals, like I said, the Legion is going to come back and burn that place to the ground. The NCR doesn't seem to be in any state to defend it properly, so not a good position there. I'm interested to see what the rest of the community thinks though, so feel free to drop your tier list in the comments below and I'll check them out. We can have a discussion. I'll see you down there.